The fortress stood like a wound on the earth, its blackened stones jagged against the sky, crumbling but not forgotten. Vines strangled the outer walls, roots splitting mortar that had once been unbreakable. The villagers said no man dared enter its remains, for whispers traveled through the ruin at night, and torchlight was always swallowed as if the fortress breathed darkness. To most it was a place avoided, a scar left to rot at the edge of memory. But to him, the traveler whose name few remembered, it was a summons. He walked across the dry grass, boots crunching on the brittle stems, the fortress looming higher with every step. The air grew colder as he neared the gate, though no wind touched the land. When he pushed past the fallen archway, he felt as if he had stepped into a different world where even sound dared not linger. The silence pressed against him, broken. Only by the faint creak of chains. At first, he thought it was his imagination metal groaning as though it protested its own existence. But then he followed the sound deeper into the courtyard, where moonlight carved long shadows across the broken flagstones. That was when he saw it. The cage dotted squatted at the courtyard center like a beast of its own, rusted iron bars fused together in grotesque shapes. Chains ran from its base into the stone beneath, as though the fortress itself had been built to anchor it there. Around it, carved into the cracked ground, spiraled symbols older than the village, glowing faintly, with a sickly red hue. The cage wasn't just built to contain, it was part of something far larger, something alive. Inside it huddled two figures. A woman, her hair tangled and matted with dust, arms wrapped protectively around a child. Their clothes were torn and smeared with grime, yet their eyes were alive. Wide, desperate, pleading. The girl's tiny fingers clutched her mother's sleeve, and the mother clutched her daughter with the fierce grip of one who knew she was all that stood. Between the child and oblivion. The traveler froze, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he thought his mind was tricking him. No living thing could have endured in such a place, no food, no water. Only silence and the heavy weight of symbols carved in blood and stone. Yet they were there. He could see the shallow rise and fall of their chests, the glimmer of fear and hope mingled in their eyes. He stepped closer. The iron cage groaned at his movement, as if aware of him. The glow of the runes pulsed faintly, a rhythm like a heartbeat. The woman raised her head, lips trembling, and whispered something he could not hear. The girl pressed her face against her mother's chest, hiding from him, or perhaps hiding from the place itself. The closer he came, the heavier the air grew. It was like walking into water, each step resisted by an unseen force. His hand brushed the hilt of his blade out of instinct, but some instinct stronger still told him steel would mean nothing here. This was not a prison crafted by men's hands alone. He stopped at the edge of the spiral symbols. The markings hummed faintly. Vibration he felt in his bones rather than heard. His gaze lifted to the cage again, to the trembling woman and child within. Their eyes met his pleading, the child's glistening with unshed tears, and in that instant, the weight of the moment pressed upon him. He understood that what he was seeing was not only a prison but a story of despair and cruelty older than any of them. No one else had dared come this close. No one else had heard the whispers that drove him here. The mother's lips formed a single word. Help! The sound, fragile as it was, cracked the silence like thunder. The travelers? Jaw tightened. Whatever power had built this cage, whatever darkness lurked within these stones, he knew one thing. He could not walk away. And so, with the eyes of the imprisoned fixed upon him, he stepped forward toward the rusted bars that groaned and shivered. Like living things, the moment his boot crossed the outer line of the spiral, the ground itself seemed to protest. The symbols flared red, then faded to a dull glow, pulsing like a dying ember. A tremor rolled through the courtyard stones, subtle but undeniable, as though the earth had stirred beneath his feet. The woman gasped. The child whimpered. And yet the traveler did not retreat. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, as if unseen hands pressed down upon his shoulders. The silence deepened, becoming almost suffocating, until even the sound of his own breathing felt wrong, like an intrusion into a place that had long forgotten life. The fortress, he realized, was not merely abandoned stone. It was awake, watching. Stopped a few paces from the cage. From here, he could see the way the bars were not straight but twisted, melted as though forged in fire hotter than any forge man had ever known. The rust was not simply decay, it pulsed faintly, as if blood had seeped into the iron itself. And the chains that bound the cage to the courtyard floor, they were not made to restrain the cage. No, they seemed to anchor the entire structure, as if holding something far beneath the stone in place. The woman inside clutched her daughter tighter. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes darted nervously toward the far walls, the crumbled towers, the jagged gaps where moonlight fell. The traveler followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing, only broken masonry and creeping vines. But then, in the corner of his eye, something shifted, a ripple in the shadow. He turned sharply. Nothing, only silence. Yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming, crawling across his skin like 100 unseen insects. The villagers had spoken of this place. He remembered their words whispered around fires, their faces pale when they told the tale. The fortress feeds on the unwary. If you hear chains or whispers, you must turn back. To linger is to invite the shadows to notice you. And once they notice you, you will never leave. And yet, here he stood. The runes beneath his boots continued their faint glow, and he realized they were not random markings. They formed a pattern, a spiraling net that encircled the cage, looping outward. Across the courtyard. A containment, perhaps. But was it meant to keep the prisoners in or to keep something else out? A low groan reverberated through the air, deep and guttural, like the sound of stone grinding against stone. It seemed to rise from beneath the fortress itself, from the depths under the cage. The child whimpered again, burying her face into her mother's shoulder. The mother's gaze, however, never wavered from him. She was terrified. Yes, but there was something else in her eyes, something sharper. A desperate hope. The traveler drew in a breath, steadying himself. His instinct screamed at him to retreat, to turn back before the fortress swallowed him whole. But retreat was impossible. Those eyes, pleading from behind rusted bars, had already bound him tighter than any chain. The groan came again, louder this time, shaking dust loose from the broken towers above. The traveler could see the faintest movements in the corners of the courtyard, now shadows shifting where no light should move, edges bending unnaturally as if the darkness itself was alive. Watching, waiting. And then he understood the woman's silence. She did not dare speak too loudly. Her whispers could awaken what lingered here. The traveler's hand hovered near the hilt of his blade once more, but he forced himself to stop. He knew instinctively that steel would mean nothing against what lurked in the dark. This was a place of binding, of curses older than men's kingdoms. A sword might kill flesh, but what watched him now was no creature of flesh. He exhaled slowly, eyes lifting to the cage once more. The runes pulsed. The shadows shifted. The fortress breathed, and in that moment, the traveler realized the truth. The cage was not the heart of this place. It was bait. The mother and child were not merely prisoners. They were offerings, and still they watched him, their eyes begging for a savior. The air thickened as if the fortress itself disapproved of his presence. The ground quivered faintly underfoot, and the red glow of the symbols pulsed with renewed life, As though his very nearness stirred something from its slumber, the traveler halted at the edge of the spiral. A single step more would place him inside the ancient design. Behind the bars, the mother's eyes pleaded with him, wide and unblinking. Her daughter clung to her, small fists tangled in her torn garment. Both trembled, though whether from fear of him or fear of the place he could not tell. He could feel the weight of their desperation like chains pulling at his chest. He glanced over his shoulder. If he left now, he could walk back through the broken archway and vanish into the night. The villagers would never know he had come this far. The mother and daughter would remain trapped, their silent suffering hidden away in this ruin, and life would continue for those who dared not see. But he could not. The fortress demanded fear and avoidance. He had lived his life defying both, drawing a steadying breath. The traveler stepped forward, crossing the glowing spiral. The world responded instantly. The runes surged bright crimson, flooding the courtyard in a sickly light. A chill wind rose. From nowhere, carrying with it the hiss of whispers, too many voices speaking too quickly for him to understand. The ground shuddered like a beast unsettled in its sleep. The mother flinched. The child whimpered, muffling her cry against her mother's chest. From the fractured walls, shadows began to peel away. They did not move like natural darkness, but rippled like liquid, sliding down the stone to gather along the courtyard floor. They lengthened into figures, tall, thin, faceless silhouettes with limbs that bent at angles no human body could endure. Their steps made no sound, yet the air shook with their presence. The traveler's hand fell instinctively to his blade. But again, that inner instinct, the same that had guided him through battles and worse, whispered that steel was useless here. If these creatures were born of shadow, then shadow could not be slain with iron. The nearest figure glided toward him, faceless head tilting as if to study him. The whispers rose in intensity, surrounding him, echoing inside his skull. His knees trembled under the weight of so many voices at once. And still, the mother and daughter watched, their hope fragile, their fear consuming. Then, the traveler did something no one else would have dared. He let go of his sword hilt. His hand fell back to his side. Instead of raising steel, he lowered himself slowly onto one knee before the cage. His movements were deliberate, calm, as if to show the fortress itself that he did not come as a conqueror, but as a witness. The shadows hesitated. Their advance slowed, limbs twitching uncertainly. The whispers faltered, their rhythm breaking. It was as though his refusal to fight had confused them. The traveler placed his palm flat against the rusted bars. The iron was colder than ice, so cold it burned, searing his skin. Pain shot up his arm, but he did not withdraw. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only the mother could hear. "You are not forgotten," he whispered. The words were not magic, not an incantation, but they carried weight. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Her daughter peeked up, lips trembling as if daring to believe. The bars beneath his hand trembled. The glow of the runes sputtered, flickering, like a flame caught in wind. The shadows recoiled slightly, their featureless faces twisting toward the cage. The whispers grew frantic, warning, pleading, he could not tell. The traveler closed his eyes. If brute force could not break the prison, then perhaps there was another way. He had heard, long ago, of languages not spoken, but remembered. Words buried deep in bloodlines older than kingdoms. Words not of command but of binding and release. Words that still lingered in the marrow of men who walked too far and listened too closely. And as he knelt there, hand pressed against iron, he let the first of those words rise to his lips. The fortress shuddered in answer. The first syllable rolled from his lips, like a stone falling into deep water. The sound was quiet, almost too quiet, yet it carried in the stillness of the courtyard The shadows froze, their whispering collapsing into silence. Even the night air seemed to halt its movement, as though the fortress itself had paused to. Listen. The traveler did not know how he remembered the words, only that they rose unbidden, etched into the marrow of his bones. Perhaps it was from some forgotten tale his grandmother once muttered near a dying fire, or perhaps it was a gift carried in his blood from ancestors who had walked stranger roads. He only knew that as the second syllable escaped him, the iron bars quivered beneath his hand. The rusted metal glowed faintly, veins of crimson light running along its length. The glow spread, crawling outward into the cage, then down into the chains that rooted it into the earth. The symbols carved into the courtyard floor flared brighter, their spiral burning like a living fire. The mother gasped. She clutched her daughter tight, shielding her eyes as the cage thrummed like a living thing. The traveler pressed on. Each word tore from his throat with growing difficulty. It felt as though the fortress resisted, each syllable dragging shards of glass through his lungs. Yet he continued, his voice low but steady, a rhythm older than any prayer still spoken by men. The shadows stirred, agitated now. They swayed like reeds in a violent storm, their faceless heads twitching. One of them lurched forward, stretching an arm of darkness toward him. The limb stopped just short of his shoulder, recoiling as his next word thundered through the air. The sound was not loud, but it was heavy, weighted with something the shadows could not bear. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the fractured towers. The runes that had glowed faintly before now blazed with a furious light, painting the courtyard in blood-red fire. The traveler's voice deepened, carried by something beyond him. His chest ached as if his ribs might split, yet the words poured out, inexorable. His hand seared against the iron, the skin blistering where it touched. Still. He did not pull away. The bars of the cage shuddered violently. Cracks of light split across them, jagged as lightning. The glow seeped through the cracks, spilling into the air as the entire prison vibrated with a low, resonant hum. The mother and daughter clung to one another, eyes wide with terror, but also with something new, wonder. The traveler grit his teeth, forcing the final word out through clenched jaw and ragged breath. The cage screamed out it was not metal, not truly. Its cry was not the shriek of iron breaking, but the howl of something alive, something ancient and furious at being disturbed. The sound clawed through the courtyard, a shrill keening that pierced bone and marrow. The traveler's ears rang, blood dripping from one nostril, yet he did not falter. The cracks widened. Light erupted from the bars, searing through the night. The fortress shook as though some great heart beneath it was breaking loose. The shadows convulsed, their forms twisting, writhing in agony. Some split apart entirely, unraveling into black smoke that vanished into nothing. Others recoiled, clawing at the ground as if trying to flee, and then, with a final shudder, the iron bars exploded outward, not with force, but with radiance. They disintegrated into shards of light that dissolved in the air like fireflies. The chains anchoring the cage to the courtyard floor snapped, one after another, recoiling into dust. The spiral of symbols flared once, violently, before guttering out. The cage was gone. The courtyard fell silent again. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the traveler, kneeling with his hand still pressed to the stone where the cage had been. His palm was raw, blistered, burned nearly black. His voice was torn to shreds, his throat raw from words not meant for mortal tongues, and behind him, the mother and daughter staggered free, clutching one another. They were trembling, exhausted, but alive. Their wide eyes stared at him, lips parted in disbelief. The traveler tried to speak, but his voice failed him. Instead, he managed only a weary exhale. The impossible had been done. But in the corner of his vision, he saw it, a dark mist rising from the freed prisoners, coiling upward. Like smoke from dying embers, the cage had shattered. But what it contained had not vanished. It had been released. For a long moment, the courtyard was still. The mother and daughter clung together, breathing in gasps, blinking against the sudden absence of the cage that had been their world. The fortress groaned, settling back into silence as if momentarily appeased. Then the air shifted. The traveler felt at first a chill sweeping across his skin, prickling every hair on his body. He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. What had looked like smoke drifting from the freed prisoners now thickened, coiling into a dense black mist. It swirled above the mother and daughter like a storm gathering in miniature, heavy and unnatural. The woman's relief faltered. She tightened her grip on her daughter, pulling the girl close as her gaze darted upward. "No," she whispered, voice breaking. The child buried her face against her mother's chest, trembling as though she recognized the presence looming over them. The traveler rose unsteadily to his feet. His palm throbbed with pain, skin blistered from the cage's final resistance, but he ignored it. His eyes locked on the mist as it writhed in the air, shaping itself not into freedom but into form. The shadows that had retreated moments ago stirred again. They did not advance this time, but crouched back against the walls of the fortress as if bowing or cowering, their faceless heads tilted toward the mist in reverence or fear. The traveler understood then. The cage had not imprisoned the mother and child. It had imprisoned what lived inside them. The mist gathered, thickening until it no longer seemed like smoke at all but a body, indistinct and shifting. Limbs stretched and curled, too many at once, dissolving and reforming. A head took shape, then split into two, then three, before collapsing back into nothing. Eyes, dozens, hundreds flared in and out of existence across its shifting surface. The woman cried out, shielding her daughter with her own body, though she must have known she was shielding her from something no arms could truly block. Traveler's heart pounded. He had freed them from the cage, but in doing so, he had undone whatever power had held this abomination dormant. He clenched his burned hand into a fist, his breath ragged. The mist's voice slithered into the air, not a sound but a presence, a chorus that pressed into the mind rather than the ear. Finally, the single word reverberated through his skull, sinking into bone. The child whimpered, clutching her mother tighter. The woman's lips moved soundlessly, as if begging a god who had long since turned away. The traveler forced himself to speak, his voice rough from the words he had already uttered. "What are you?" The mist rippled, expanding outward, stretching. Tendrils across the courtyard. "I am hunger. I am patience. I am what remains when mercy is forgotten." The words were not simply heard, they were felt. Each syllable dug into the heart, a weight of despair pressing on all who listened. The traveler staggered but held his ground. The mist's tendrils curled to mother and child. They shrank back against the courtyard wall, nowhere to run. The woman's eyes locked on the travelers. She did not speak, but her gaze screamed. The truth. Save her, if not me. And then the traveler understood the second truth, crueler than the first. The cage had not been designed to hold prisoners of flesh. It had been designed to hold the darkness that lived within them. The mother and daughter were not captives. They were vessels, hosts. And now, emptied of their prison, the darkness was free to claim its full form. The traveler's chest tightened. He could feel the fortress itself pulse with approval, the ground thrumming like a heart that had long awaited this moment. The shadows lining the courtyard swayed reverently, whispering again, their voices like a choir to welcome their master. The mother screamed as the mist lunged. The traveler moved before thought could stop him, stepping between them, his burned hand rising instinctively. The mist struck him, wrapping around his body like icy water. The voices swelled in his mind, overwhelming, crushing. His knees buckled. As the darkness pressed against him, trying to force its way in, and still he stood, for the first time. The shadows faltered, their whispers halting as though uncertain of what they were witnessing. The mother clutched her daughter and stared in shock. The traveler was not resisting with steel or fire. He was resisting with himself, his will, his defiance, his refusal to let the darkness claim another soul. And the fortress, ancient and patient, seemed to pause. As if it too had not foreseen this choice, the mist writhed against him, cold and crushing, a storm of shadow trying to burrow through his skin. It was like drowning in ice and fire at once. Whispers invaded his skull, voices layered upon voices, each one hissing temptations, threats, and screams. They clawed at his will, promising relief if he simply yielded. The traveler staggered, dropping to one knee. His burned hand shook as it pressed against his chest, as though he could hold the darkness out by force alone. His breath came in ragged gasps, eyes bloodshot from the strain. The mother sobbed behind him, clutching her daughter as if holding her could shield her from what was unfolding. The little girl whimpered, eyes wide and wet, watching the stranger fight a battle that could not be won. And then the mist laughed. It was not sound but sensation, mockery flooding the air. The fortress itself seemed to echo with it, stones trembling as though eager to see the outcome. The shadows lining the courtyard joined in, their whispers rising to a fevered chorus. "You are nothing." The voice slithered, filling his mind. "A man of flesh cannot bind what flesh cannot contain. Step aside, and I may let you live long enough to watch what becomes of them." The traveler clenched his jaw. His vision blurred, darkness crowding the edges, but still he forced himself upright. "No," he rasped, his voice raw and broken. "You will not have them." The mist recoiled slightly, as though startled by his defiance. Then it surged, condensing, pulling itself free from him. The traveler stumbled back, coughing blood onto the stones, his legs barely holding him. The darkness rose, swirling into the air above the courtyard, gathering its form. The shadows bowed low, their whispers turning into chants. The mother screamed, shielding her daughter's eyes, but even she could not look away from what was taking shape. The mist became solid, or at least something close. A figure towered above them, its body a shifting storm of blackness, half-formed and ever-changing. Its limbs were too long, fingers clawed, its head a shifting mask of many faces that blinked in and out of existence. Eyes glowed across its body, opening and closing with every breath. It was no longer bound, no longer hidden within flesh. It had been released. The ground shook beneath its weight. The symbols carved into the courtyard flared again, though weaker now, their power fractured by the destruction of the cage. They pulsed as if trying to contain what was already beyond their reach. The traveler forced himself to his feet, though his body screamed in protest. His chest burned where the mist had pressed into him, and his hand was little more than a blistered ruin. Yet his eyes did not leave the creature. The mother's voice broke behind him. "What have you done?" He did not answer, because he did not know. He had freed them, but in doing so he had unleashed something older and hungrier than any prison could contain. The creature stretched its limbs, savoring the air like a freed animal testing its cage no longer existed. Then its many eyes turned to the mother and child. The traveler moved without thought, planting himself between them and the monster once more. His body was weak, his strength nearly spent, yet his stance was unshaken. The creature tilted its shifting head, studying him. "You are not like the others," it murmured, its voice rippling through the stones. "Most turn away. Most cower. But you—" It leaned closer, eyes opening all across its surface. "You would rather break than bend." The traveler's lips curled into the faintest smile, though it cost him every ounce of strength left. "Then break me," he whispered, "but you will not touch them." The mother gasped. The child clung tighter, whispering through her tears, "Don't." The fortress trembled, shadows quaking in anticipation. The monster spread its arms wide. "So be it." And with a roar that shattered the silence, it surged forward. The monster descended like a storm, its tendrils of shadow crashing down with a force that shook the courtyard. The traveler braced himself, knowing his sword, his strength, his very flesh were nothing against such a thing. And yet he did not falter. The first strike knocked him backward, slamming him against the cracked stones. Pain ripped through his body, ribs groaning under the impact. He forced himself up again, his breath ragged, spitting blood onto the ground. The mother screamed, clutching her child tighter. The girl's small voice broke through the chaos. "Please, stop. Don't hurt him." But the creature only laughed, a sound like shattering glass carried on the wind. Its many eyes opened at once, glowing with hunger. "Flesh is weak. Flesh is mine." The traveler staggered, his vision swimming. He could feel the monster pressing against his mind again, clawing at the edges of his will, trying to carve its way inside him. He had fought battles before, seen blood and fire and death, but this was not a battle of swords. This was a battle of surrender. And then clarity struck him. He could not kill it. He could not banish it. The fortress had not been built to destroy. The darkness, it had been built to contain it. If there was no cage left, then only one choice remained. His jaw clenched. He straightened, swaying but unbroken, and stared directly into the seething storm of shadow. His voice was hoarse, cracked, but steady. "If you need a vessel, then take me." The mother gasped. "No." "Don't." The girl's cry cut her off, desperate and shrill. "You'll die." The traveler did not look back. His eyes never left the monster. "Better me than them." For the first time, the creature hesitated. The chant of the shadows faltered, uncertain. Its many eyes narrowed, studying him as though trying to understand the madness of such a decision. "You would bind me within yourself?" The traveler nodded once, firm. His burned hand rose, trembling but resolute, fingers splayed as if in invitation. The creature tilted its head, then released a laugh that shook the very air. "So be it." It surged toward him, tendrils wrapping around his body, plunging into his skin like icy knives. The traveler screamed, his knees buckling, but he did not resist. The darkness poured into him, flooding his veins, filling his lungs, clawing at his heart. It was agony beyond fire, beyond any wound of blade or arrow. Every instinct screamed at him to push it out, to fight, but he forced himself to endure. To open, his vision blurred, flashing between light and blackness. He saw memories that were not his, fields burning under alien skies, rivers running red, children screaming as the monster devoured worlds long forgotten. Each image tore at him, breaking him piece by piece. And yet, beneath the weight of despair, he clung to a single thought. They must live. The mother and daughter must live. That thought became an anchor, a chain forged from his will. And as the darkness flooded him, it struck the chain and found it unbreakable. The creature howled, not in triumph but in fury. Its vast form collapsed, folding inward, its many eyes extinguishing as it was pulled into the traveler's body. The shadows cowering in the courtyard shrieked as their master disappeared, their forms unraveling into smoke that dissipated into nothing. The fortress shook violently, as though raging against what had been done. Stones split, towers crumbled, dust filled the air. Yet still the traveler stood, trembling, until the last shred of darkness vanished inside him. Then silence. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, his body broken, his mind burning with the weight of what he now carried. His eyes glowed faintly for a heartbeat black. endless and then dimmed again. Behind him, the mother and child clutched each other, staring in stunned silence. The mother's lips trembled. Why? Why would you? The traveler turned, his head offering them the faintest smile. His voice was no more than a whisper, because someone had to. And then he rose unsteadily, though his legs trembled, and began to walk away from the shattered cage, from the ruins. From them, because he knew what he had become. He was no longer free. He was the prison. The fortress had grown silent. No more. Whispers drifted through the air. No more shadows stirred at the edge of vision. The runes etched into the courtyard had gone dark, nothing more than dead markings and broken stone. For the first time in what might have been centuries, the ruin seemed empty. The traveler stood in its center, shoulders hunched, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His body trembled with exhaustion, yet the greater weight was invisible. Inside him, the darkness churned like a beast pacing its cage. His veins burned, his heart thudded irregularly, and his skin felt stretched too thin to hold what had been forced within. He was no longer merely a man. He was the cage now. Behind him, the mother and daughter dared to move. They stumbled across the fractured ground, eyes darting nervously at the place where the monster had stood only minutes before. The girl tugged at her mother's hand, voice small and uncertain. "Is it gone?" The mother swallowed hard, unable to answer. She knew the truth, even if her daughter did not. She looked at the traveler's back, at the way his shoulders shook, not with weakness, but with restraint. She saw the faint flicker in his eyes when he glanced at them, the glimmer of something that was not his own. And still, he had chosen them. The mother's lips parted, trembling with words she could not form. Gratitude seemed too small, too fragile, for the enormity of what had been done. She simply bowed her head, pulling her daughter close, tears sliding silently down her face. The traveler did not linger. He turned from them without a word and began to walk. His steps were slow, heavy, but each one carried him farther from the cage, from the mother and child, from the choice that had chained his soul forever. By dawn, the villagers gathered at the edge of the ruined fortress, drawn by the tremors and the unearthly sounds that had torn through the night. They came with fear etched into their faces, torches clutched tight as if fire could protect them. And then they saw. The fortress no longer breathed with malevolence. Its stones lay cracked and still. No voices whispered from its walls. The symbols that had glowed for generations were faded, powerless. And in the center of the courtyard stood the mother and daughter alive. The crowd gasped. Some cried aloud in disbelief, others crossed themselves in reverence. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide with awe. But when they asked when, they demanded to know what had happened, neither the woman nor her daughter spoke. They only pointed to the road leading away from the ruins. There, a lone figure walked into the horizon. His back was bowed, his pace slow, his clothes torn and burned. He did not look back, not once. The villagers stared after him, whispers rising among them. Who was he? A sorcerer? A cursed man? A savior? None could say. Some swore they saw his shadow flicker unnaturally as he walked, shifting into shapes not his own. Others claimed the air around him rippled faintly, as if something vast and unseen moved within, but all agreed on one truth. He had freed them when none else dared to enter. The mother and child wept openly now, clutching each other as they watched their savior vanish into the distance. The girl's small voice trembled. "Will we ever see him again?" Her mother shook her head slowly, tears shining in the dawn light. "No, my love. He has given too much." The villagers, struck silent, bowed their heads. For a long time, none dared speak. The air itself felt holy, marked by sacrifice. And so the story began. They would tell it around fires. whisper it to their children, carve it into memory. Man who walked into the fortress, who knelt before the cage, who defied the darkness not with sword or fire, but with his own soul, the man who became the prison, the man whose choice left the world speechless, and though none would ever know where he walked after that day or how long he endured the burden he carried, his legend would outlive stone and shadow alike. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are not those who slay monsters, they are the ones who dare to carry them.